intro music. How are we doing this morning? That was actually one of the first times I got intro music, and I didn't imagine that it would be that song. So I'm from California, and so I'm 2 hours earlier. So this is actually 6 a.m. for me. So it's a little earlier, no coffee. We're going all natural organic here in this presentation. So hopefully I can stick with you guys. Before I begin, with any talk that I do around North America, it's always important to have really good research and making sure that the content is relevant to the audience, right? Because you don't want someone to come up here and just say something that's not really relevant to you, right? And during this process, I've never had as much help during this. Dan Rust, can you please stand up, Dan Rust? Dan has been on multiple, give him a hand, please, give him a hand. Dan had been on multiple calls with me, set up interviews for me to talk to individuals out here to make sure that the content that I was bringing forward about millennials and the research and the companies that I help is relevant to you guys. So I really hope that you guys like the material, and it was really helpful to have so much guidance along the way. So really appreciate that, Dan. Just want to say that before I begin on this. So service-oriented leadership. What is service-oriented leadership, and what are we going to be learning about today? Well, essentially, it's like thinking about others, caring about the individual, and finding what's best for that person, right? Really understanding who you're working with on a deeper level as a leader in an organization. And a lot of the interesting things that are happening today is that there's so much changing going on with millennials, younger demographics, as you look at sort of larger tech industries like Amazon, 18-month turnover, right? And you look at Gallup research, over 66% of employees saying that they're not engaged in the workplace. So you have all these people who are not engaged and a lot of turnover. So the question then becomes, how do you engage people effectively? And a lot of the things that I'll bring up on this talk may seem a little out there, like you're going off in a certain direction, but recognize that engagement is a huge problem across the board, and a lot of the tactics that are being used to engage people are a lot different, so they will feel a little bit awkward, uncomfortable at first. Now, here's the thing though. People, you ever heard about rapid change, right, and rapid innovation across the board, right? We've all heard that. We read the media and all of that. But how much rapid change is really taking place? Well, here's a simple quiz. Does anyone know who this individual is in the middle? Yeah, okay, we got that one. Okay, that's the easy one. Well, what about this one? Nothing there. Okay, so no one there. All right, because this is fascinating to me, and here's why. If you look at the 2008 most viewed championships, right? We have first one, the Major League Baseball League. 19 million people watched. What about the NBA? How many do you think the NBA was? Just, you can yell out, that's fine. 30,000, okay, pretty close. 30,000, 30 million, not 30,000. What am I? Order of magnitude off there. What about the Super Bowl? 60, 100, 50? 103 million, right? Should have had like prizes and just like threw it at people from up here. So 103 million. What about League of Legends? So one person knows what's going on here. You know where this is going. 105 million. What is that? That's what I heard. What is that? And that's sort of the paradigm that's happening right now, is that you have worlds, huge crowds of people watching sports that you've never even heard of before in events. Does anyone here know Twitch? Twitch, yeah. Online gaming platform where people can watch other people playing video games. Now more popular than NBC and CNN, and soon to take over the NFL, NBA, and Super Bowl, all of them combined. So there's all these massive changes taking place in today's industry. In addition to that, you have some companies that are catching on. Here's Bad Grandpa in the middle of a virtual reality video game. And virtual reality actually becoming a new thing today, where you have these large competitions of people playing in alternative universes in order to, I guess, win something. I don't know, maybe there's a prize at the end. I'm not really sure why they're doing it, except it looks pretty cool if you're in it. They don't look that cool with that on that headset. So, like traditional job searches, usually where you go in the newspaper, right? You circle it, you apply, and all of that process. But now you have things like McDonald's having Snapchat ads, where basically that you can submit your application to McDonald's through just Snapchat, which is crazy to see how that's happening. So there's a lot of major shifts today that are happening. And here's a couple of the big ones. First off is the humification of companies. It's that a lot of companies are now becoming more authentic. They're sort of dropping this corporate facade and trying to appeal more to the individual. And you see this through branding, but also recruiting, that people are trying to be a lot more relatable. Then you get the gig economy. That's you guys. You're sort of leading the forefront in this, where you have these smaller jobs instead of these longer traditional employment structures. And you see this through Uber and Lyft, and it's totally disrupting the economy. And that's where the gig economy has come about. Global culture, you no longer have teams that are just here in one city, but they're all over the world. I've actually built two 100% remote teams, and it's a completely different way of managing team structures. And virtual reality, it's becoming a real thing. It's not mainstream yet, but it's just starting to crop up on the edges, on the fringes, as they like to say. So the way that this presentation works is that if you ever at a cocktail party and you want to impress people, you can use this word called the diffusion of innovation. And what that is simply this curve of when someone produces an app, it's how long it takes it to be mainstream. So in the bottom right corner, I'll step down. Sorry, camera crew. The bottom right corner is the innovators. They create the app. Then the people who stand in front of the iPhone store, well, that's the early adopters, right? And then all their friends who get it because their best friend has it, those are like the early majority, and that sort of peaks. And then over here is like my grandfather, because he doesn't even have an iPhone or anything like that. And so they're like the last ones here. So the whole point of this presentation is to take the early adopters, right? The people who are younger, who are used to all these new technologies and methods, and sync it up much closer. So we're up to date, and what we're doing actually makes sense and resonates with people who we're trying to engage. As they say, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So a lot of people are already using these techniques, but it's not common mainstream yet. So it's converging onto a single point. That's sort of my goal for this presentation. So when Dan and I were talking, the right corner is the structure that he gave me: onboarding, management, mentoring, and engagement. So I'll be covering about millennials, going over that a little bit. Engagement, because that was the biggest thing that was talked about. Everyone who I interviewed was like, engagement's our biggest issue. How do we handle it? So that's the first thing I'll be tackling. Then management, mentoring, and onboarding and recruitment I'm actually not going to be able to cover, but in the breakout sessions later, I'll be covering those in more detail along with all the other topics. So that's what we'll be going over today. Now, what a lot of people wonder, though, and because there's also a short introduction so people don't have a lot of context, is that what does a 27-year-old know about, say, management, recruiting, onboarding, those things, right? Addressing the elephant in the room. So if we move forward a little bit, who knows this place? I know one person, right? Yeah, who was the one? Yeah, we talked on the phone. Okay, I didn't have your face. It's not a face call, it's a phone call, so I couldn't recognize your voice. So now face to a name. So this is where I went to high school, right? And every day after high school, when I wasn't in a sport or in a club, I would take a 15-minute bus ride and go to this office right here on Los Gatos Boulevard. Do you recognize that? Yeah, Los Gatos Boulevard. And on the top row, there's a bunch of offices, and one of those offices, there was a startup, Silicon Valley startup, that was run by my parents. Now, these are not all my parents. My dad is the one with the tie, and my mom is to his right. And so every day, I would sit in the conference room, and I would work. But I would observe what was happening. And I didn't know later on I'll be using all the management techniques that they were using. So for instance, to put this in perspective, at the time of which they had this company, they still have 2 employees that are working from them full-time, and that company was acquired, and they started a new one, to give you an idea of like the loyalty and engagement that they had. On top of that, when I wasn't in the workplace doing sort of white-collar work, on the weekends, I would help my dad build houses. So I started to understand blue-collar management. How is that different than white-collar? From there, I went to UC Berkeley. That's where I studied computer science. So I was actually following the talk on the application development quite closely. From there, this is Silicon Valley, and if you look, do I have a pointer with this? No, I don't have a pointer button. But those three little arrows, that's San Francisco. To the bottom of it, those two arrows right there, you have Google headquarters, and to the far right upper, that is actually around UC Berkeley. So those are all the places that I worked at in terms of companies. I worked at Nokia, Lithium, InfoScout, and a couple others, including founding my own tech company when I was 23. And that's when I managed someone. My first employee that I hired was double my age, but it was a really smooth transition, and then I didn't understand that was a huge issue. But when I started helping other companies about this, it was kind of bizarre to me because I got all this training when I was younger on how to work with people effectively. And some of those things I'll be sharing with you today in terms of what I learned during that time that I was not only running the different companies that I had, but also from my early, I guess, high school days, if that sounds interesting to you. So going forward, though, after I founded my tech company, exited, I started speaking. For some reason, I got into the TEDx circuit, spoke a couple times on there, published my first book, and I started helping companies with technology. And eventually, pointer. This is a good one, too. You can, shoot down a helicopter with this. I don't know why that occurred to me first. So after I exited that company, I was giving technology talks, and then eventually someone came up to me and said, "Hey, can you talk about millennials?" And I was like, well, I'm a millennial. That should be pretty easy, right? But if you look on any of the news, they say they're entitled, spoiled, unmotivated, all that stuff. And I was like, oh, how can I present on that? And I started digging deeper. And what I found is that this whole generation divide that's happening has been going on not for decades, hundreds of years, but thousands. First person to talk about that is Socrates. Socrates didn't write it down. Plato wrote it down, and he said the children have luxury, they have bad manners, contempt for authority, and they show disrespect for elders, and love place in the chatter for exercise. That sounds really close to CNN, but not quite, because a little bit. That's a pretty elegant sentence there. But it's sort of like the paradigm that happens is that the fascinating thing about the term millennial wasn't created by the Census Bureau or the government. It was created by two marketers who were generation experts, and they went to the media, hey, here's our book, here's our research, here's what the generations are doing. Millennials, I present to you. And all the media companies ran with it and started creating all these polarizing campaigns, and that's where you get all these weird stereotypes that don't make much sense. And if you look, the vast majority of people who talk about millennials are not millennials. That's like going to a foreign country and talking to everyone who's not been there how it's like. So my goal being a millennial is sort of to give you sort of an insider perspective on some of the things that are happening on that level. So it's very difficult to talk about this subject because you have the most ethnically diverse generation there's ever been in the US. And on top of that, you're painting a decade of people all across the board. So it's extremely difficult to say they act like this or don't act like that. So I'll keep this very high level, and when I talk about millennials, I'm just mentioning people in their 20s or 18 to sort of 30 range, okay? That's what I'm covering for this talk. So the first thing is the environment, how the environment's changed. As many of us have, or some of us older individuals here have been through the 2008 crisis, a lot of younger millennials have not been through that, which actually really shapes the perspective of going out in the future and not being as sensitive to the times that we're in that are quite, I guess, respectful. It's it's a lot easier in the job market. But on top of that, you start having a very interesting thing taking place where the parental structure is a little bit different too because the parents went through it. So they become hey, I want to protect my children. I want to make sure they're well taken care of. And they sort of become overburdening to the point where you get some crazy things like some mother wants to move into college with her child. And this is from the Fox News in Colorado. And it's hey, but if you see this, you'll laugh oh, that parent's that's a helicopter and that kid can't stand up for himself. But you look deeper and you realize that she's actually trying to protect her children for something that happened in her past. And so there's just a natural human response that takes place here in terms of this parental style. Now, that's sort of the environmental aspect. The next one's technology. My first TED Talk that I gave was about technology, how smartphones change the way you think. And what we start to get tuned into is, I call it the Amazon Prime effect. Like when you start expecting everything instantaneously, right? That you can buy your shoes, your pants, your blazer. In fact, the only thing that I didn't buy on Amazon Prime that I'm wearing is this blazer. And we get so expected for everything to be instantaneous, right? All the time. But then we start expecting our careers and our relationships to be instantaneous. You can't swipe left or right on a career. That takes a long time. It's a process. It's not something that is a gratification like instant, I'm done. And so what happens a lot is you have people who are not used to that adjustment when they first get to the workforce, and we'll be going over later of why that engagement is an issue. The second thing about technology is that with technology, the point is that we are able to do more at an older age. And when that takes place, people push out buying a house, getting married. So the first time in history, there's this age of 20-somethings who have no long-term obligations. And people are wondering why doesn't someone stay in my group? Why does someone always switch? Well, imagine for people who are more senior in this room, if you could not get married or buy a house till you were 33, what would you do with your life? And what you find out is that sort of behavior is very similar to what's happening with 20-year-olds today in the millennial demographic. So it's just right now we have never seen this before, and we're trying to adapt to it. It's like first world problems on here of if someone has everything they need and they're able to do more at an older age, how do we handle it? And right now we're still adjusting to that. So those are two major things in terms of millennial behavior that I think are worth taking away. Now, two major polls that millennials have towards companies, organizations, places where they join. First one, growth. Pretty common. Harvard Business Review ranks that as number one in their research for millennials, that they want to go somewhere that they can grow in their career. Pretty basic. Second thing, community. They want to be a part of something greater. Pretty standard. So when we go into the next portion, which would be engagement, those are the two things that we're going to be adding in this, because those are things that people said, look, I want to make sure that this is very engaging when they're in a group and make it feel like it's community. So let's break it down a little bit. Engagement. Current structure. There's a whole bunch of nannies for one particular role model manager. I was at the table in the back corner, and one person actually had 126 for one individual. So that's sort of the structure right now. It's very flat, right? There's a slight hierarchy, but the thing is it's a really good business model because it makes sense. It's like it's an Uber for babysitting, right? For being a nanny, and that's really, really on point. But as you've probably seen, there's some cracks along the way, and that's where you're getting sort of like engagement issues. So when I started thinking about this being sort of quote unquote a millennial, and I realized, okay, so you open up your app, you sign up with the platform, and eventually you start getting gigs, right? You go out, you babysit or you tutor, and you take your build, whatever, and then you go back and forth with this for a while, right? It's very removed. There's no one actually interacting with you that much, maybe the role model manager a little bit. And your friend maybe works at Starbucks, and you say, hey, this is the team that I have, this is what I'm doing. How's your job at Starbucks? Oh, and she tells you this story, and that story, and this story, and that story, and the team, and blah, blah, blah. And eventually, when I started to realize this, you're really isolated a lot. It's a good thing to have, but you're very alone. And especially with the demographic that was said, hey, we're mostly like female college students, being alone is not like, just using pseudoscience here, it's not like the top priority like in their minds. So I was like, well, there's sort of a gap here. So how do we work with this, right? Because I know also margins are pretty tight. So how do you make this work effectively in an organization? It's not like you can just hire a bunch of people and say, all right, you're engaged now. So how do we make this work? So the big fallacy here is that if you give them predictable work, they will stay. And I attest this not because it's a millennial, but rather sort of the financial times that we're in. Bull versus bear market. Bull's optimistic, bear is more pessimistic. Right now, we're at a time where people can choose where they want to work. Imagine, so this will eventually happen. Maybe it's 2 years, 5 years, I don't know. I'm not one of those money guys who'll tell you when the financial crisis is going to happen. When it flips, right? You have all those people in a tech company who get laid off, and they're the ones who are going to be going and working in Starbucks because they need to pay the bills a little bit. And those easy jobs that, say, the college students would be able to get, they no longer have. So now your app seems a lot more appealing, and you might not have an engagement problem anymore. You might not have a retention problem because they're like, getting a job is really hard. Right now, it's very easy comparatively to history. So that's my thing in terms of saying this whole concept of if you give them predictable work, they'll stay. Yes, because of the economic times that we're in. But once that shifts, it starts to break. So because we're in the times that we're in, how do we make this work? I always like to think about this in a little more abstract sense, is that if you cannot meet them in person, because I know that quarterly meetings is a big thing when people say engagement. Oh, we have quarterly meetings, we invite everyone, but very few people show up, right? That's sort of one of the big things for building those relationships. But how would you engage someone if you can never see them in person, right? So it's a more difficult challenge. So I've built 2 100% remote companies where I probably met 1 or 2 of them in my life. My number 1 employee right now, she lives in Canada. I met her one time. She saw me at a conference, and I said, hey, you want to work for me? Oh, sure. It's pretty cool. And so now she handles like a lot of my calls, but she represents me, like the whole brand. So it's super important position. But she's like one of 10 different employees that I have all over the world. And engagement was a huge issue early on. So I started to figure out what to do effectively in an organization when you have just no face-to-face contact. So looking at case studies here, does anyone here? No, probably no one here knows Envision because it's a tech company. Well, Envision's a tech company in Silicon Valley, has over 1 million customers, 60 different time zones, 100% remote. 2017, Glassdoor rated it one of the best companies to work for. 100% remote. How do they do this? CEO, Clark Valberg, says increasing the communication bandwidth, video conference calls, having that continuous feedback. From hearing this, I started adding bi-monthly calls with the entire team. Second week of doing that, we had a huge breakthrough in revenue. Why? Because they started cross-collaborating and talking about problems that were happening. Bingo. Second thing, tight onboarding process. So I know this isn't as relevant to what you guys do specifically, but it's to show you in the extreme case what people are doing. He literally maps out 3 weeks of exactly every single hour of what someone should do when they first join the company. Because it's that time when people fall off if they're a remote employee, is that very beginning part. The term is ghost. They'll just ghost you and they're no longer there, right? You probably have heard that term before. So I know I could tell like that happens in here. I was like, oh shoot, I hit a soft spot. Structured workflows, making sure that everything's documented, everyone knows what to do. A lot of managers don't have that sort of clarity in a business. And last but not least, they do have a one-year get-together, and that's, I would say, your quarterly meetings when you all get together, have a party, recognize each other for their effort. So that's sort of a case study of how a company is able to work effectively with 100% remote employees. So what's the most impactful thing that you can do for engagement? Well, the number one thing that's already being partially rolled out right now is looking, first off, I got this idea from different hierarchies. My sister is a general manager in a restaurant. And what I saw is that when people would first join, right, maybe in high school, and they were like a hostess, right, they can become a server or they can do food takeout. But then if they do really well, they become assistant manager, then floor manager, then general manager, then training manager. So there's all these different levels. And what I've realized that, first thing, team leader. Who's already adding that in there? I know some people are. Yeah, you've already added that. You've probably seen it. It's probably an interesting reflection where you have, not only do you have sort of that buffer in between the role model manager, but now you're able to say in the interview process, hey, if you work here for this amount of time, here's some leadership growth that you can have in your career that you can later take on to the next level, right? It's not just clock in, clock out, transitional job to get me through high school. So first off, this is helpful for one-on-one engagement. I realize you have remote employees, because this is in case we do have remote employees here that are working for you, that face-to-face engagement, hey, there's another human being that cares about me, is imperative, especially because you have this certain demographic that you're working with, people who probably want sort of that face-to-face interaction. Next is real-time mentoring. Fires handled. I know there's a ton of fires that happen, like for instance, someone might put diapers in the middle of the dishwasher and the mom freaks out and says, why did this ever happen? And someone has to handle that, right? And not all fires are worth handling, so the team leaders will be able to handle that, and the role model will be able to handle the most important problems. And next is upward mobility. You're now giving them some sort of growth, right? Because remember in the beginning we said, number one thing, Harvard Business Review, growth for millennials. So a lot of people are concerned about, if I give someone more responsibility in an organization, how can they handle it? So I want to play you about like 10 seconds of this video. This is SpaceX, and this was the launch. If you can move it to probably 4 minutes or so, jump it there, 4 minutes down the line. So this was one of the successful Falcon Heavy launch by Elon Musk, has this company, and this was one of the successful launches that they had for space travel, so you can cut it there. Now, here's the kicker and why I showed this. Why would I show this video? Average age is 27 years old at the company. And a lot of people get caught up in, look, someone's younger and they won't be able to handle responsibility. I've hired multiple college students to call on executives for business, yeah. But people are very capable if you give them the right structure and you have the right training and get them to that place, right? So that's usually a barrier where they're like, oh shoot, they're not gonna be ready for it. Well, it's how this training goes, because people are very capable of a lot more than you probably think in some regard. So I just want to show you that as an example of that people can do a lot at still a very young age. Now, in terms of building this out past this team leader, my good friend of mine, Brian Comstock, says everything in your business can be outsourced, including you. And this is one of the biggest things that I learned building my second 100% remote company, because what was happening is I would have specific job roles, hire people for those, but then eventually they would leave. And I was like, why is this happening? What was happening is the company was growing, but they also, the good employees, wanted to grow as well with the company. And I didn't have a next level for them, so they just left. And so what I started to realize is there's different things you can do to sort of take work off your plate, but it works as sort of a track for whoever is on the team. And they call this a system of procedures where you literally, I can go into this more in the breakout session, you have each person who runs a company or whatever role you're in, you have a certain activities that you're doing, right? You have customer complaints, hiring new candidates, weekly mentoring. If you really map this out and really map out each individual one, there's like 20, 30, maybe sometimes 75 if you're like the franchisee owner. And what's interesting is you can break each one of those off into a new title, a new track. And if you get really crazy with it, you can get something like this. So you have your nanny and tutor. We talked about the team leader. You have a manager trainer. I was on the call with someone. They're like, oh my gosh, I have to hire another manager trainer. That's going to cost so much money. Not if it's someone who's in college, who's been a team leader for a good amount of time, and it's your number one person. You don't have to give them a huge pay raise, because it's a huge thing to put on a resume that I was training individuals to be managers. On top of that, assistant social media manager, right? What about helping out as assistant recruiter, that they'll be able to go on college campuses and help out with the recruiting process? These are just activities that the franchisee owner has to have, but now you're sort of creating tracks in here. So when someone joins, it's like, okay, I don't have to just be a nanny. This is great, and I'll still continue to be a nanny. But now I should be here because there's sort of tracks that I can grow with a particular company, and if I want to become invested in it, it's not just a dead-end job where I clock in and I clock out. So that's vertical and horizontal engagement, right? You have that team leader talking to the nannies on that level. That's vertical. The way that you scale engagement and really get a tight culture is horizontal, is when you get the nannies to talk to each other, and then those relationships start to build. Relationships are one of the biggest things that keep people at companies. And leveraging that is fairly powerful. So how do you actually turn it from vertical to horizontal? Facebook as a forum where people can actually interact in some particular portal that they can engage with one another. Team chat rooms. I saw in the application, correct me if I'm wrong, I did not see sort of any like Slack room or anything that the team can work together, right? So that might be something worth implementing where you have the team can go into a portal. It might not be worth implementing in the app, but they'll be able to collaborate when they have a team leader. The team leader has that room, so everyone can talk with each other in that environment. Next, onboarding cross-engagement. So one of the biggest issues is that someone might do step 1 and 2, but then people still are not talking with each other. Those organic conversations are not happening. So whenever someone new comes on board to my team or an organization, what they do is they tend to say, okay, tell us some stuff about yourself and introduce yourself in the call and try and find common ground with other people on the team. And if you set up those initial bridges, they start to grow. And that's where you start getting that relationship building. But you have to set it up early, because if you don't, you might get a very stale environment where there's no engagement for cross-employees. The last one is something that I was reluctant to put in, but I thought it was worth thinking about a little bit in regards to the team dynamic. Because if you look at the first 3, you still don't have a reason to communicate with other people aside from just chatting, right? The last one was pressure, that there has to be some reason of why people have to communicate. And this was very different from the mission structure, and that's why I'm saying this is optional. Is that what if for a team group, there was some sort of goal, quota, or something to accomplish? One of the things that I was on a software team, and we had to basically repair the whole website because the top engineer left. So the whole engineering team had to come together, about 10 people, for 2 weeks, and stop everything. The whole company halted, and everyone was staring at us. You got to fix this. We spent 2 whole weeks staying late in the workplace, and at the end, the CEO said, "Great job, everyone. I'm going to buy you all a trip to Napa on me. You get to go wine tasting and come back." And we did that. But the wine tasting wasn't the thing that I don't remember, no. The wine tasting was fine. It was, the powerful thing about it, though, was that we had to come together because there was some sort of pressure. We had to start cross-communicating a little bit. And that's where with a team, that if you do have, say, some quota, maybe it's team hours worked, right? Showing that level of engagement. Maybe that's the amount of referrals that the team gets. Social media content marketing that you have. I know some of you have tried this a little bit. Testimonials, referrals in the app market or on Glassdoor, or showing up at the quarterly meeting. All those can be used as quotas for the team, and then the team now has to come together and work on that. Now the trick here is that what's sort of the incentivization for the nanny? What's sort of the end goal result, that if they accomplish this, what do they get? And that's sort of the question mark that I'll leave for people here, because I don't know the financials, but if there's some sort of end reward, like, hey, if we hit this goal this quarter, this half year, this is what we all get. You pair that up right, the motivation's set, you have the structure, now you have a team that's going to start cross-communicating and working together, and that's where you get that super high level of engagement, people staying and really starting to refer it to their friends. We're going a little bit low on time, so I'm going to skip this, but there's a lot of benefits to cross-team communication, and I'll be going this over in the breakout session. A couple other things. Alumni program, I thought was important mentioning. When you have people constantly going through your company and they graduate, isn't the whole point is that you have the right connections when you are able to graduate? So I think you guys have a really good potential here to sort of leverage an alumni network that people have, that once they go through the system, that maybe they come back in the quarterly meetings and give talks like, hey, I'm working here, what's your resume look like? Let me help you get a job in the future. So now there's a reason why someone can join. Hey, join our family, our community, because we have an alumni network and we'll take care of you in the future. Quarterly meetups, one thing I have to say about this is that I think it's great that people are doing this, but it has to be strong enough pull of, I want to not hang out with my friends and go to this meeting. A lot of people are like, hey, we should have, resume building workshops. Well, it's like, okay, that's cool, but what's something that can really entice someone to be there? And that's why I was saying, well, maybe if you had people, actual employers that once they graduate college are there, maybe from the alumni network, who are presenting or sort of being able to connect people up, that might be worth it. but it's having a strong enough why to go that's going to make people show up to those meetings. So that's engagement. The next one's management. How do you manage people effectively? Or maybe if it's the team leader, how are they able to cultivate that environment so it works together cohesively? Let's see. So there's a lot of research done in Google of what's the most effective team and what are sort of the main things that are done. All international study looking at all teams across the world, and they found 5 things for any team highest performing. First, psychological safety. That if someone feels willing to sort of go out of their zone and it'll be okay, and their manager has their back. Next, dependability. The people around them, they can lean on and works. Structure and clarity. You guys do this quite well actually with your onboarding process, so I think you're covered there. Meaning. Now, if you have that team environment right, you have the meaning thing taken care of. And also impact. I think that your company is very impact-driven. So this right here, I think, falls right into place. Now, here's what's fascinating to me. 2 non-impacts, demographic. It doesn't matter who exactly is on the team, but diversity is very important, but it doesn't have to be from certain different areas. Also, remote teams and in-person teams does not mean it cannot be run effectively. They did not find that if teams were remote, they couldn't run effectively. It didn't matter if they were remote or not. It was those first 5 criteria that outweighed them, which was quite fascinating because you would think that if you had a whole bunch of remote people, you could not have a great company culture and team, but that wasn't the case. So 2 big things that I hear from employers is that people who are millennials or younger are entitled and unmotivated. The big reason for that is, I would say, grossly, is it can be mapped out when someone first graduates, they go into their first job, and what they have is a very unique experience. And I was giving a keynote in Canada, talking to the CIO of Box, and they were like, hey, when we hired the best talent in the world, 3 months in, they drop engagement. Boom. I have no idea why that's happening. We're doing research. You should talk to our chief people officer. And I did, but the thing was that I realized it was actually this existential cliff that happens. That when someone first goes out into the workplace, they ask themselves 3 months working there, is this all there is? Is this all this, is this really what work's all about? And it's sort of a really tough reality to adjust to because you look through Instagram, through Facebook, it's sort of this catered reality of like everyone's best foot forward. And now there's this huge discrepancy that people have to adjust to. And it really rocks people hard, and that's where you see that initial drop. So when you hear people that say entitled, well, yeah, they don't really have maybe much work-life context, but also unmotivated, that hits pretty hard. And that's where the motivation sort of kicks in. So the way that I help companies get around this problem is mapping quantified goals. Now, Gallup Research did this and said, hey, they did some research on here and found that 72% of millennials, when you quantify the goals, are more engaged. Now, you may say, well, how can that be used in the company? Well, if you have those different levels in that hierarchy, that if they're able to progress in some way towards their ideal self, that is a recipe for engagement. But what you have very often is that someone says, oh, you'll be, say, a senior individual in 3 years. Well, no one wants to hear that. They want to hear, what sort of quantifiable things can I do to get to that point? Because if I want to accelerate the process, I'm in control of my future. So that's a big thing to help out with sort of the 2 biggest things that I've seen with companies and millennials. And last is mentoring. One of the big things that is happening in these organizations is mentoring is a huge thing. Some people may say in career development, others may say, well, in the job itself. And so there's team mentoring, right, mentoring. There's the cross-team membership and reverse mentoring. And the one thing I wanted to throw out here was the reverse mentoring, because I think it's quite powerful in terms of if you utilize it effectively. Because most people hear about the first 2, where maybe that you have someone mentor someone on the team, get them ramped up on the job, or maybe that 2 people are mentored in different parts of the organization in some regard, right, matched up. So reverse mentorship is something that was popularized by Jack Welch. Who knows Jack Welch here? Yeah, very popular CEO, and here's what he had to say about it.
Now, I was in London a month ago. I run into this fellow who runs our global consumer finance company. And he says to me, well, I'm working on this project, and I'm a mentee. Mentee, he's the CEO of the business. I said, what do you mean you're a mentee of what? He said, well, in e-business, I'm not up to speed. He said, in order to get up to speed, I found the brightest young person under 30 in my organization, and I brought them in as a mentor to me. Well, the point of the story was I was there listening to that story. That was one of the best ideas I'd heard in years. So I came back. Within 48 hours, everyone in our company was looking at who they got for a mentor, who they could get to help them, and we tipped the organization upside down. We now have the youngest and brightest teaching the oldest.
Oh, his face is epic. I wish you could pause it on there. He's like, whoa, epic idea. And that's exactly what we're after here. And so the whole concept of it is there's a lot of questions that franchise owners, role model managers have with engagement, newer technologies, how to recruit, and having that sort of model where someone will be able, who is younger, help you with mentoring, and not mentoring, but with newer technology trends, Instagram, Facebook, those kinds of things, and how to increase that could be a very, very valuable resource. And you won't need someone like me to come in and say, hey, here's what millennials need, because you'll be on the field getting this information and be able to apply it to your territories. Because I'm sure some of this will be helpful to everyone here, but each person's different in their territory, and when you have people uniquely helping you there, you get those customized answers that you're looking for. So we're a little low in time, so I have to skip that one, but I'll share it in my breakout session. So we covered a lot today. I know we went through millennials, engagement, management, and mentoring. And I try to just pick out little things and give you ideas in sort of like a buffet that you can just pick and choose which ideas most apply to you and your franchisee, or what part of the franchise you're working in. So kind of bring this all together. This is the CEO of Lego. And now we're going to tie it back to service-oriented leadership. And I don't know if you knew this, but back in 2005, Lego almost collapsed. You remember when you were in childhood and you always knew someone who had Legos? I mean, raise your hand if you knew someone who had Legos in your childhood. Please raise your hand. Right. All of us, imagine Lego was just gone, right, and never existed anymore. So that was about to happen. But Legos brought him on board. He was actually a kindergarten teacher, got into Lego, started as an intern, worked his way up, and became the CEO of the company, first non-family member. And the company was in the gutter. It wasn't doing that well. And they had to figure out a way of how to turn it around. So utilizing service-oriented leadership, he traveled to different countries and met with different people at plants and said, how are you? How are things going? Because he had to understand that because he had to lay off 20%, 15% of the company. Imagine having to do that and just fire everyone at once. Poof, gone. So he had to face a lot of tough decisions, but also innovation was a tough thing. How are they going to keep innovating on this? How are they going to stay new and relevant to the younger audience? Well, they started taking different ideas, and the first thing they started doing was actually tapping into the woman demographic. They started making dolls, Lego dolls. And they also started to take a really big Hail Mary pass. And they said, what if we took this so huge and tried something so different to really increase the brand that we can totally reinvent what logos means to people? And I don't know if you've seen this, but very recently they came out with this movie, and I'll show you the introduction.
Black. All important movies start with a black screen. And music. Edgy, scary music that would make a parent or studio executive nervous. And logos. Really long and dramatic logos. Warner Bros. Why not Warner Brothers? I don't know. DC. The house that Batman built. Yeah, what, Superman? Come at me, bro. I'm your kryptonite. tech does, but that logo is macho. I dig it. Okay, get yourself ready for some reading. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change. Who? No, I said that. Batman is very wise. I also have huge pecs and a 9-pack. Yeah, I've got an extra ab.
All right, you can
Now,
cut it there.
let's start the movie.
So that was the Batman Lego movie. And that was wildly successful that they're creating many more movies after that. And as funny as that beginning was, that the CEO of the company really took a Hail Mary pass at this. But it really came down to seeing himself as the leader of the organization and realizing that he had to work with people on the lowest level to make some dramatic change happening and start listening to the ground and really pushing it in a different direction. And Legos is now the #1 toy manufacturing company in the world. And it could be better. It's a very cheesy statement, but it does have some power to it where if you do want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make the change in terms of the service-oriented leadership. Because I believe that everyone here is doing a great job, but it could be taken to that next level and be able to implement some of the things in this talk and try things a little bit different are what the things that you can need to take it to that next place. In other words, you already have everything you need to succeed. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here. Awesome. Cool. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We now will go into a short break and begin our day's sessions. Thank you.